All right, we should be live tonight. We are going to be covering, as you can see on the screen, HTML, CSS, building your own website. Let me introduce myself. My name is John. I'm from New York, and I am a former Thinkful student, actually. I took the Thinkful course, the web development course, back in 2017. And basically, I was working at a technology company, but I was not doing anything coding related. I was doing things that were more content related and marketing related. But I basically saw, especially being at a tech company, that's a lot of the opportunities and career growth for a lot of my coworkers were happening because they had specific skills. So I definitely wanted to look into learning these particular skills. I didn't even know if I wanted to be like a web developer or whatever the case may be. But so I looked into courses. I found Thinkful. It did look like an interesting kind of boot camp sort of thing because you are basically able to do everything remotely, which is great. Sort of like how we're doing now. You can interact with people from different cities and things like that, which is great. I had a call with the academic advisor, and it really did sound like something that I would want to do. So that's what I did. I signed up for the web development course, same one that we will be talking about today. And from there, I was able to learn more JavaScript, things like that. I had a little bit of a background in HTML and CSS, but not really too much. We are going to look into, the basics of HTML, CSS. Feel free to ask whatever questions that you have about HTML and CSS because questions are always welcomed tonight. And if you guys want to reach out to me later on, that's totally fine. I could give out my LinkedIn or Gmail account or whatever it is if you guys have any additional questions. But just a little bit of background about Thinkful and the courses that we offer. As you can see on the screen, it's basically a tech boot camp. We try to train developers, designers, data scientists, and the way that we do that is mainly through really three main objectives. The first is that we do one-on-one mentorship. So just as this webinar is great because I am able to talk to many of you. It would be even better if it was just a one-on-one sort of thing, and I was able to basically, give you guys like private lessons sort of thing, and you guys were able to ask whatever questions that you want and have the attention of a mentor or a teacher. Basically like that. Like that's a better way to learn. That one-on-one mentorship and tutoring. There have been studies and things like that, so that's why Thinkful definitely does do that stuff. The other thing is the project-based learning. If you guys have ever heard of GitHub, or if you have a GitHub account, GitHub is basically a cloud software where you could kind of put your portfolio online. So you could kind of put your coding, things that you've coded, your websites, your applications, things like that. And it kind of serves as a supplement to your resume. So when you actually go to job interviews for web developer or software developer jobs, they're not just going to want to see your resume. They are going to want to see things that you have actually built. While your resume may look good, it's good to also have a GitHub or even a Bitbucket portfolio that kind of has these sorts of projects that you have worked on. When I started at Thinkful, I had absolutely nothing in my GitHub account. In fact, I don't even think I had a GitHub account. By the time I was finished with the course, I had, I believe, 3 or 4 projects. I can't really remember. I was able to basically go into interviews and say, hey, look, I built this thing with, a couple of my peers. I was able to do it remotely as well. So I was able to learn Git commands and things like that. So it really does kind of help you in a way that you are going to be working in a similar fashion as a software developer. So what Thinkful does is it kind of prepares you for that kind of life, which is great. The last part is very important. This bolded text right here, the guarantee. We really trust our career services team, and we really trust our program and things like that. Like, we want you guys to get a job. if you take the course and you end up not getting a job, that is basically, it's a failure to us. We want to make sure that everyone that comes through our course is able to, equipped with the tools to get that job. So that guarantee is very real. If you do not get a job after 6 months of finishing the course, then we actually do refund your money, which is great. So, we take the loss if, things don't go well, but at the same time, like, we want you to succeed anyway. So hopefully it doesn't even come to that. So that's our big guarantee statement. That's why it's the biggest, one of the biggest things on the screen right now, the guarantee. All right, that's just a little bit about Thinkful and a little bit about me. Feel free to stop me anytime if you want to ask more questions about the course itself or other courses that we do have as well, or whatever else you want to ask. I'm pretty open. I could see the chats. You could also ask me private Q&A sessions. That's totally fine too. And yeah, I mean, like it's pretty interactive. The whole point of the course, this webinar tonight, is to just get insight into what I know as a former student and also, Thinkful current mentor sort of thing. So, so while I can't answer every single question that you guys have, for example, questions about like tuition and all that kind of stuff like that's better. That better serves for an academic advisor or someone else. I am able to answer a lot of different questions regarding, how to do HTML and CSS and other things and things like that. So, don't feel shy or anything like that. All right. Oh, looks like we have some friends in here. That's pretty good. That's awesome. All right. So if you guys could see my screen, this is basically what we're going to be building. Obviously, like, I'm gonna, be straight with you. There are a lot of websites out there that you are able to build things without code, right? You have your Squarespaces, you have your Wix, you have all these sites, even WordPress, things like that, where a lot of them are drag and drop builders. A lot of them, you can do things without knowing how to code. However, as someone that, I use that kind of stuff. Actually, my portfolio is in Wix. So like I do use things like that and I do find them very, less time consuming sometimes and pretty efficient when you need something quick. However, a site like this is built strictly in HTML and CSS. And I think the important thing is to just kind of understand how HTML and CSS do work and how they work together. And also how JavaScript kind of fits in to the other two as well. I think all three of those things, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all of them are basically, they're all a team. So basically the way it works is HTML is kind of like the structure. Like if you were to think of a house, it's kind of like the frames of the house. CSS is kind of the paint that goes on the house. And JavaScript is basically like the gasoline and the electricity and things that basically go through the house, right? So that's basically where we are now. Something like this is basically just, a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS. And, hopefully by the end of tonight and with a little bit of practice, you'll be able to make something like this in just a matter of 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe. And, just kind of understanding how the tagging system works with this and just structurally what HTML and CSS look like. That's going to be the goal for tonight. What I will say is that, you can always kind of see HTML and CSS in any sort of web page that you do look at. So for example, if I were to inspect my page, can I do this on Firefox? Inspect element, yes I can, okay. All right, so I usually use Chrome, but I'm using Firefox for tonight because it works a little bit better when I use this webinar program. But basically what I did was I'm basically just inspecting my page. And you can see on the left side here, there is a search HTML option. So all of this stuff is HTML, as you can see. And the more stuff that I do scroll over, it does kind of like go scroll onto different parts of the page on the top. So this is HTML, as you could see. And this over here, where it says filter styles, like styling is basically all CSS. So this is basically the CSS portion of it. There's a little bit more here. We're actually going to look at margin, border, and padding a little bit later. But basically, any sort of web page that you do go to is going to have these sections that make up those sections, basically. Any website that you are on when you go on the internet are essentially made up of, HTML, CSS. Like those are the building blocks of, what we call the internet, which is pretty great. And we can definitely talk about why. If any of you guys know why HTML really is the go-to source for why HTML is what we use to kind of use the internet, please put it in the chat. Take a shot at it, see what you think, and we could discuss it for sure. But other than that, this is just a standard profile page, and we'll look at how to build it. All right, so no one answered my question. That's okay. That's totally fine. All right. All right, so HTML. Okay, so this is very important. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So it technically is not a coding language. I think that there are kind of people that do believe that it is. There are people that do believe that it is not. I think that it is kind of debatable. I could see the argument for either side. But I don't really think it is a coding language. I think it's well, I mean, even in the name, it's a markup language. It's not coding. Coding is basically, making something automated. But there really isn't anything automated about HTML. It's more so that you're actually just creating something. It's basically like you're just format. It's kind of like a formatting sort of thing. So it's not so much coding, even though it is used in a lot of, obviously in coding environments and things like that. The more important part is this part, the hypertext. So basically, whenever you create any sort of web page, and this could be, a single page web page, or it could be, Facebook with, tons of different types of pages. Every one of those pages is essentially just one document. And each of those documents links to another part of the page. So for example, if you had, let's say we go back to this page, we have our main page here. This would be one document. And then let's say there's a link that links to, your portfolio page or something like that. That would basically be a link to your portfolio page. Then there's another link to your, let's say your resume or your about page or whatever it is. Those would be separate documents that would be linked from like a button or some sort. So all those links are basically using hypertexts. So essentially, like when you go to a page and you see that there is a link, like it's a bold blue text with an underline, that's essentially a hyperlink. And so what HTML is it's just a collection of a collection of documents. It's a collection of separate web pages that together, together these web pages make up an entire website. And then, together all these websites that we have are essentially what we know as the internet. So that's why we call this HTML hypertext markup language. And yeah, so each one of those sites is basically made up of this part. There are a ton of elements in there. As I showed you before, like this is what HTML essentially looks like. And every one of basically everything in HTML consists of tags. So as you can see here, we have an opening tag and we have a closing tag. They look pretty similar, as you could tell. The only difference is that the closing tag does have this little slash here. But effectively, like, this one says H1, it's surrounded by these little ankle brackets. And this one as well also says H1, it's surrounded by these brackets as well. Whatever is inside of there, this is going to be the content, as you could see. So basically, whatever you put inside of this content is essentially what you are going to write, and you are going to write it as an H1 element. We will look at what H1 means I'm going to not do that just yet. I'm going to go to a new site. And I will link you guys this site in the chat. So this is codepen.io if you guys want to follow along. If not, that's totally fine too. So codepen.io, it's a really cool website. You're able to code online essentially, and basically just show off what you're doing and things like that. For example, if I were to scroll down, I can see other people's work. So for example, let's just say this person has this work here. You can see that they have a lot of HTML here. It's doing really funky stuff here. They have a lot of CSS and they have a lot of JavaScript. So this is a pretty complicated site that they created, but this is essentially, we could view how they made their entire project with CodePen. All right, so I'm going to go back to CodePen's main page now. As you can see, codepen.io. And instead of scrolling anywhere, I'm just going to click this button right up here on the top left where it says Start Coding. All right, cool. All right, so now basically we have 3 different windows here. We have one window that says HTML, we have a second window that says CSS, and we have a third window that says JS. JS stands for JavaScript, by the way. We won't really be looking at JavaScript tonight, but just so you know that these 3 things all kind of fit together, and that's why they're all pretty much grouped together like this. A little something else is we can change the view. For example, we can put our screen this way or this way. I kind of actually like this screen better, so I'm going to leave it as this. And this settings is actually pretty cool too, because we are actually able to add things called libraries or frameworks or things like that. But we won't really be looking at that just today. So basically what we want to do is we want to drag the JavaScript down because we're not going to use it. And we're going to drag CSS right towards the middle of the page just so that we can have HTML and CSS equal now. Now, whatever we build is going to basically come up in this big black screen here. Once I start writing HTML, this is actually going to turn white. So we're actually going to just write this exact phrase right here. So we're basically just going to do h1, hi there, and then close out our h1 tag. So let's try this out, see what happens, and we'll take it from there. So h1, hi there, h1. And notice I did put the closing bracket here. The closing bracket is slightly different from the opening bracket. This is very important that you do close these correctly. And on the right side, you can now see that I did write hi there, which is pretty fantastic, right? Like if this were my website, I'm already pretty much halfway done. I have my hi there. Now all I need is just basically a button or something like that. So that's basically all HTML is. Obviously, there are more interesting things that you can do with HTML, but the most basic thing that HTML is basically just a bunch of tags that wrap around a bunch of content. That's really its most simplified way of explaining HTML. For example, this is the H1 tag. If you were to do the, let's say, H5 tag, hi there, you'll see that this is pretty similar, but you could see that the text is a little bit smaller. So as you could guess, H actually stands for header or heading. And the H1 tag is usually the text that you see on top of a section, for example. So it may be like the title of an article or the title of a web page even. That's usually what H1 is used for. H5 is not used as much. As you can see, it's a lot smaller. There is actually an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. And the bigger the number is, the smaller the text is. But that's just basically different types of text that you could do. We do have other types of tags as well. We have a P tag, for example. This stands for paragraph. How about I am a paragraph? And you can see that this is now pretty much the ideal size for reading content online. So if you are going to, let's say, read an article, any sort of article online, it probably is a P tag. Now there are ways of making the text bigger and smaller using CSS, for example, but the P tag is pretty standard. I would say that most of the time text is written in P tags unless it is a heading. Because the P tag is just, it's pretty standard. A lot of times if you go to a website and the text is too small, the user experience may not be very good. Or if you go to a website and the text is very big, the same thing. It might be a little bit uncomfortable for someone on that website for some reason. All right. So these two, or less so the H5, but the H1 tag and the P tag are pretty common. Like those are probably two of the most common tags that you will get. There are other types of tags, however. For example, there is a such thing as an A tag. This stands for anchor, and you know, obviously, like you would think that it would be something like this. I am an anchor tag. But unfortunately, you could see that this actually just creates an additional P tag. The A tag doesn't do anything different. However, you are able to do things with the A tag. The A for anchor, the anchor tag is actually able to link to different websites. So in order to do that, let's say we didn't know anything about the A tag. What I'm actually going to do is just say A tag W3 schools, and you'll see why. This is a fantastic website, and you can see that this is okay. So this website is called W3 Schools, and as you can see, it's basically kind of like an encyclopedia for anything code related. We have HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We have just a ton of different things that we could do. If you scroll down a little bit, you can kind of see that there is an example for an A tag, and you can see what I'm missing here. This is basically this part here, which I'm not essentially writing just yet. And why is that? Well, if we were to go back to our slides, this is the simplified version of what HTML does, right? We have tags. Yep, that's exactly right, Paul. So this is the very simplified version of what an HTML element can do. However, we are able to add different dimensions into here. So for example, these are called attributes. I can put this thing called a class inside. And we're going to look at how exactly we are going to put classes, although it looks like Paul is already on the case, or actually for href. But basically, attributes can go inside of the opening tags, as you can see here. Before this h1 class is even closed, we are putting a class called intro right in here. All right, so pretty similarly, that's exactly what we're doing here. We're basically putting this href, and then we're putting a link right inside of the tag. So I'm going to come back here to my codepen, and right in here, I'm going to write href because it's referring to an external link. And then I'm going to put the actual link where I want to link it to. So now, if I were to click this text that says, I am an anchor tag, this is actually going to link out to that W3 Schools page. All right, so, and this could be any page. This could be Google or Facebook or whatever the case is. But that's basically how we do this kind of thing. All right, so that is the A tag. You know, just for good measure, let's actually add a class to the paragraph tag that we have. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to find the opening tag, which is this P tag here in line 4. And basically what I want to do is make a space. And it actually doesn't matter how many spaces because the HTML is not going to read this. But I basically just want one space. And now I just want to say class equals, and I just want to name a class. This class could be called whatever I want it to be. I'm actually just going to name it para1 because it's my first paragraph. All right, and that's basically it. There's not really anything else that we could do. I am going to also give a class to these headings. So I'll just basically say class equals heading and class equals heading. All right. Make sure you do put your classes inside of quotation marks or the href. Paul, that's something that you should be aware of as well because your href does not have quotation marks, so it might cause an error. Make sure that there are quotation marks around anything when you want to create any sort of attribute. There should be quotation marks around it with few exceptions, but that should be the case usually. All right. So now I have a bunch of different classes. I have an href here. I could also add a class here as well. I could add as many attributes as I want to this. I'm actually going to call it anchor class. And just to make it a little easier to read, I could Let's see if I can line this up a little better. Oops. There we go. All right, so there we go. All right, so now I have a bunch of different classes, and as you can see, right now you see that I do have classes in these elements, but nothing is really happening. And this is very true. You can see on the right side of the screen when I had the class absent from the right side, from this part of the screen, it didn't look any different from what it looks like now. And this is true. Classes actually don't do anything in terms of HTML. The classes are really there to refer to other areas. So for example, when I start to get to my CSS, I'm going to use the classes to basically like add new things into my CSS. And we'll see what that looks like in a second. All right, so hopefully that makes sense so far. Bookmark this site, W3 Schools. I'm actually going to put it in the chat as well. Because this is a really fantastic site. We used it to basically just see how to write the A tag, but you could basically use it for anything. As you can see, there are a ton of different HTML tags. We've only really touched the surface. Like for example, if we were to go to the div tag is probably the most common thing that we will see. Div tag is basically what's known as like the divider tag, and you can kind of see that div tags are usually used to kind of group information. So for example, everything here is part of this one div tag. HTML is essentially used in sort of like a tree-like fashion. As you can see that everything here is in this one div tag. So for example, if I were to come back over to my pen, and if I wanted to group the P tag and the A tag together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of indentation, just like that. So it's easier to see these guys. All right. And I'm going to put a div tag around them. All right, so I'm going to put these div tags just like this, and let's not forget to put the closing bracket there. All right, so now thanks to my tree-like structure, I'm able to see that this div tag actually lines up with the closing one on line 10. So always use the indentation to your benefit. I think it's very easy, especially when code gets pretty big, to kind of forget where things are grouped or how things are grouped. But by using correct indentation like this, I could kind of see that this P tag is at the same level as this A tag, and this div tag is at the same level as this div tag. All right, so just keep that in mind. And yeah, that's basically it. All right, so we looked at HTML. We looked at attributes inside of HTML. And this is all great, but honestly, like my web page right now, it looks extremely boring. There's nothing going on at all. I basically just have a few words, white screen with black letters. I think it looks kind of stupid. And honestly, if this was my portfolio, I think that I'd be very disappointed because nothing is really going on. All right, so that's basically why we have to add in this next thing here. This is codepen. This is HTML. This is CSS. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch the second part of this video, please click the link below in the description. Hopefully you learned something today. I hope to see you back at another one of our Thinkful webinars soon.